Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
David McGuffin is the host of Canadian Geographic's Explore podcast, a contributing editor at Canadian Geographic magazine, and a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Before making the switch to podcasting in 2019, David spent over 20 years as a foreign correspondent and senior producer for CBC News, NPR News, NBC News, CTV News, and the PBS NewsHour, working from bureaus in Moscow, Beijing, Rome, Nairobi, and Washington. He now lives in Chelsea, Quebec. Please welcome fellow podcaster David McGuffin. David, welcome to Let's Take This Outside. This is an absolute honor.
Wow, no, it's honor's all mine. What a great joy. I feel like our mutual podcasts have a lot of great overlap. So I'm really thrilled to be here.
And we probably know 500 of the same people too.
Oh, no question. No, we were just we know at least we've had two of the same, Ray Zahab and Adam Schultz have both been.
And Adam Schultz, yeah. We're going to talk about that later too, because I was like, we need to talk about this. But we've been Twitter friends for a while now, and I'm like, oh, this guy's the coolest. Were you plunging in Meech Lake?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We started, that was a pandemic thing. We built a sauna and I bought this fantastic ice saw from some company in Wisconsin, and I've got like a little, almost mini lap pool size in the lake. And so we do cold plunges all winter long, it's great. It makes you feel amazing. You have to have a degree of like just let go of all senses as you jump in the first time, but man, it feels good.
Can you hold me to this? Can I come jump in this winter?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a date for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Hold me to that. You live in Chelsea, Quebec, and I know that you grew up in the area, but I talk about, like, even though I interview people all over, I talk about Gatineau Park constantly and my love for it. But why did you choose to live in Gatineau Park? Yeah,
so I grew up in Ottawa. I'm like an Ottawa Valley kid, like deep roots here. But coming out of high school, I was like, Ottawa is just a rinky-dink small town. I'm getting out of here. So I left for like 23 years, lived overseas, lived all over the place. I was working as a foreign correspondent and stuff. But then I reached a point where I'm like, I keep coming back and I'm like, why don't I live here? And Gatineau Park is a big part of it. We're super lucky to have a house. It was a cottage, now a house in Gatineau Park proper. And as I lived overseas longer and longer, what Canada was for me became the smaller and smaller definition, and it basically became the bay where our cottage was. And so when it came time to move back, I was very lucky to be able to move into it. We got it winterized, and very lucky to be able to move back into the old family cottage. And it's 30 minutes from Ottawa. And the beauty of Ottawa, the best thing about Ottawa that no other city of that size or larger has in comparison, is its that proximity to wilderness and nature. The fact that you can be on Parliament Hill, and 30 minutes later, you can be in the bush and not see another person for an entire day, basically, if you want, and that's what a gift, right? And that's a huge part of the pull for me coming back, was just, what a beautiful city that this is in that way.
I've been here for maybe over 10 years now, and even though my family's in Southern Ontario, it feels like my home now. You build the community here is amazing on top of that. But it's hard to explain to people what you just described. It's like, I can walk down and get my coffee at Bridgehead, but then I can bike 30 minutes and be ready to do a loop of Gatineau Park on my bike, or cross country ski in the winter, or it's just so accessible. And there's not many places, let alone affordable places, that you can live to be, and not saying Ottawa's affordable, but like that you're able to do that. So now I'm like a half city kid, half nature. And it's very rare that you can find this, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gatineau Park is the largest cross-country ski network in North America. It's massive, hundreds of kilometers. You could spend the entire winter just doing different trails, and yeah, it's, we are so incredibly lucky. And it's like I lived, before moving back here in 2018, I lived in the States for a better part of a decade. And, I lived in Washington, which is just city surrounded by just urban area, all the way up to Boston, basically. And the idea that you can, like Canada generally, we're just all on the edge of wilderness if we're living in cities here, And it's, I think we spend a lot of time fretting about how world-class our cities are or not. And I mean, what's unbeatable, again, like Ottawa, what's unbeatable in Canada is just that we have all these natural areas that are pretty accessible, like you can, if you got a car, you can get pretty deep into the bush and just enjoy nature in a way that, like especially Americans or Europeans especially just dream about, I was up in the Yukon and it was all Germans up there. I was like, I paddled the Wind River and the Peel River, and the only other people we met were Germans. And there's a direct flight, I think, from Hamburg or maybe Frankfurt to Whitehorse in the summers. Because that many Germans, fly over.
Wait, do Germans love paddling? Is that a thing?
Paddling, hiking, whatever. I think Jack London is huge over there or something, like Call of the Wild and all that.
That's such a niche thing that I've never heard. Like, I actually have some German friends I've never heard of that before. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think there's a real fascination. I produced a podcast as well for Perry Bellegarde when he was National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and that podcast would chart in Germany regularly too. There's like this real, fascination with the First Nations history, with the natural history, and I think because we just have all this nature, and so we're lucky.
What's outdoor activities do you like? Like, what do you like? Is it canoeing? I'm assuming is on that list, but like, what else? What do you do?
Yeah, no, I love to canoe. And then we cross-country ski a lot up here too.
Skate, classic.
Skate, yeah.
You skate?
No, I don't. Oh, sorry, no. I was ice skating. No, I don't skate. No, I just slog through the
classic.
Yeah,
classic
ski.
Okay.
I classic ski. Yeah, exactly. And we snowshoe a lot too because you can sort of go off trail a bit more that way too, which I love as well. So yeah, it's those are the main ones. I do a lot of hiking too.
What's your favorite? I know it might be hard to choose favorite. This is very Ottawa centric. What is your favorite hike in Gatineau Park?
Well, I mean, I'm very lucky to be close to Trail 40, which used to be called the McDonald Trail, which goes up from Meech Lake up to the Ridge Road, and you can go up to the Champlain Lookout from there and come down the Wolf Trail. There's some great lookouts up that end as well, and yeah, I do. I mean, I really mostly hike in around where I live. Possibly out of laziness, I don't know, but up around Lac Philippe too. There's some great trails up in the top end of the park as well. So yeah, but there's so many great options. I did a really fun hike. We hiked from literally at our back door up through the park to up almost near Shawville.
Oh wow!
Yeah, spent a night in a bed and breakfast, and so it was a very long 2-day hike up along the Ottawa River. But it was beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous. Like that, the Quebec side of the Ottawa River, especially on the river, is really pretty. It's pretty unknown, unspoiled, and kind of lovely. And yeah, so it's not as developed as the Ontario side.
I love when I'm driving up to Luskville area. I love that ridge. I love that ridge so much.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous. Yeah, so we came down that ridge line down there, sort of tripping on. What were the acorns or whatever? So yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah, I think it was just because they'd had the gypsy moth infestation, so the oak trees had produced like hundreds and thousands of extra acorns, and so they were all over the place. So we were kind of skating down the hill.
Oh, that's cool. David, how does a person go from exploring the world as a foreign news correspondent to hosting a podcast and being a contributing editor for Canadian Geographic? Like, how does that happen?
How did that happen? Yeah, so I spent a lot of years. So I worked for the CBC overseas, CTV, and also did some work for NPR. And so a good chunk of that was in and out of conflict zones. So I spent a lot of time in sort of very ropey places, trying not to get shot at, and it's fascinating. I was in Somalia a lot. I was in Afghanistan. I spent 2 months embedded in Kandahar in Afghanistan with the Canadian forces there, which was really kind of eye-opening. And, I would go on patrol with them in armored vehicles maybe like once a week. And it's my first experience with roadside bombs and that sort of thing. But every time you go out, you go over a culvert or a bridge, and literally every time you're like, is this the one? And luckily I was very lucky that nothing happened while I was there, and I sort of got out completely unscathed. But I developed a real deep appreciation for just the hardships of what our guys went through there. I did that for about a decade, pretty in a hardcore way. And then I had young kids, and I I reached a point where I just sort of developed a sense of mortality. And like, I remember going on a trip into Somalia once, and I would be concerned about where I was going, and I would definitely plan it out and make sure I had also plan B, plan C, plan D, and how to get out of there and everything else. But I would never really worry that I would get hurt. And then I went on a trip into Somalia towards the end of my time in Africa. I was based out of Nairobi for 6 years for the CBC. And I just had a sense of dread the entire trip, like something is going to go horribly wrong. And it didn't. But I was kind of like this wake up call. And then I was like, and then my kids were, getting older, and I was just like, okay, well. So we moved to Washington, DC, and I'd done a lot of work with NPR as a freelancer. So I wound up working for their morning edition there, and was super lucky to be there just as they were sort of figuring out podcasting. They were really at the cutting edge of Planet Money was sort of their first real podcast, and did very well and still does very well. And that's like around 2010. So I sort of saw that coming. Like NPR realized, like, we do radio, podcast is just, it's the same thing, really. Like, we can do this. And so they leapt in feet first, and they produced a ton of great podcasts, and I was there through a lot of that, not directly involved. But in 2015, our morning show, we decided to put out a podcast. Basically, the New York Times started putting out The Daily, and my executive producer at the time, and which came out in the morning, like as we went on the air. So yeah. My executive producer described that as the New York Times parking a tank on our front lawn. So we...
So you went to war, I guess?
Sort of, yeah. She's a feisty woman. So we produced our own podcast called Up First, which I was very lucky to be sort of part of the launch team of. So, which was like, these are the 3 stories you need to know as you start your day. And it did very well, and it does very well. It's I think one of the top 2 daily news podcasts, I think, in the world still, or something like that. So, but it was good. It was kind of neat to figure out how that all worked, and that it was kind of possible, and, just the technology behind it. And so I lived there till 2018, and for a whole bunch of family reasons, decided it was time to move back to Ottawa, and had all this podcasting stuff sort of in my back pocket, and sort of came up here. And at the time, podcasts were just really getting going up here. So I seemed to have a skill set that a lot of people were interested in. So I was super lucky. So started with Canadian Geographic and launched the Explore podcast, which is still going. And then sort of started taking on other clients. And I do a lot of work with Indigenous groups, and sort of a lot of sort of more organizational or institutions and stuff like that. But it's been lovely. I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to make this transition, because it's such a versatile, as you know, it's such a versatile medium, and it feels, I always say, and it feels very punk rock. Like, it's, you don't need a lot to get it up. Like, it's just, you got a laptop and a decent mic and, internet, and off you go, kind of thing. So, yeah.
It must be way better for your nervous system.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm not doing, I was such a daily news, and it's an adrenaline thing for sure. It took me a while to get off of it. And when I first moved back, I was still doing reporting for NPR from up here for about the first year and a half, and then sort of shifted over, basically. But yeah, it's definitely easier on the nerves. No question.
Wouldn't it be a nature lover's dream, though, to work for Canadian Geographic magazine? Like, how did that feel to be like, oh, I'm now editing for them, and I'm like, that must have felt really cool.
It is cool. And so my family has a long history with that organization. So my great-grandfather was a guy named Charles Campsell, who was the founding president of it. So we've always sort of had a toe in there. And I did an expedition for them in 2018. So Charles Campsell was, in his day, was sort of one of the great explorers of his time. So early 1900s. And he worked for the Geological Survey of Canada and mapped like huge chunks of the Western Arctic, like hundreds and thousands of square. Yeah. So in a time when, so this was his life for like 14 years, he would put together a group of guys. They would go up with canoes, like cedar canvas canoes, into the middle of nowhere and just paddle for as soon as the ice was out until the ice came back in, and then come back. And he would be doing all these charting by hand. And yeah, amazing. So he did a trip up the Wind and Peel rivers, mapping that in 1905. So we have his logbook for all that, and we have his maps for all that. So I pitched to Canadian Geographic, they have sort of these expedition grants. So I said, we could recreate this trip. So I went with my son and my cousin Terry Campsell, who's from up there. We still have a lot of Campsell family up in the Northwest Territories because Charles was from there originally. Yeah, so we did this river for 2 weeks, and we had all sorts of GPSs and everything else, but his hand-drawn map that the Geological Survey used was the best map of them all still. Yeah.
And they still use it? They still use the...
I guess so. I mean, you can get it online. Absolutely. Yeah. You can download it. It's an amazing map. The detail's incredible, and it's still, obviously rapids shift a little bit and stuff like that, but it's, it was great. And just having his daily notes too. So we flew in a float plane to the top of the river. To get over that same mountain range, like portaged, like over that mountain range, and this is like, they're going ice out, right? So it's probably mid-May or late May when they're up there. No, later, it was June. But anyway, there were points in his diary where he's describing having to tunnel through snow because the banks of snow down this creek valley that they were going down was so deep. The easiest thing to do was to dig through the snow and get to. And so, I mean, whatever we did was super cushion. We had Kevlar canoes and
Was there points during that expedition where you're like, I don't know how he did, like, I don't understand how he did that.
Yeah, no, he was an incredible man. I'm absolutely in awe of everything he did, because he did multiple of these trips in his 20s and early 30s, and would have a crew of guys. But you were out there. I mean, there's no sat phone, right? I mean, anything goes wrong. Yeah,
Do you feel kind of like a responsibility to keep up that expedition like spirit? Do you feel like there's some kind of responsibility there?
Yeah, I mean, so my mom knew him pretty well. He was her grandfather. So we always sort of grew up with stories about him. And so when I first started doing stuff overseas, I never really connected the two, but I think there's obviously, that sort of exploration gene or bug or whatever it is was definitely passed down through him, because, I mean, he did that for years and years and years. And yeah, clearly he wrote there's an autobiography he wrote, a memoir called Son of the North, which is worth reading. It's pretty fascinating, and it describes a lot of those journeys. So yeah, we grew up with all that mythology. So I think definitely there's that's sort of still pulsing through as I go forward. Yeah.
When it comes to planning out expeditions or even hikes or exploring, do you tend to lean more towards paper maps, or do you actually use technology too? And
yeah, no, I'd use technology too. But I grew up in the era of paper maps, and I have a real affinity for them. And I just think through the bigger picture of an expedition, they're just more useful to give you an overall sense of what you're getting into. And when we're on an expedition, I always definitely bring paper maps, because you never know what's gonna happen. You never know what's gonna happen. So yeah, double ziplocked, So yeah, keep those handy.
Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
We mentioned at the beginning of the episode that we've had a couple common guests.Ray Zahab, who is, I don't even know how to describe Ray. I want to have him back on, especially after his cancer battle, but incredible person.
He's amazing. Yeah, he's a friend of mine, and I will say an absolute madman in the best kind of way.
Madman is a good way of putting it. And so nice.
Lovely. Just the loveliest guy. But, ran across the Sahara Desert a marathon a day, basically, for 3 months.
Normal things that people do.
Yeah, normal things.
Yeah, I remember, I'm sure I actually hope he hears this, but I remember when, he announced his cancer diagnosis. And I'm like, if there's anyone who has the ability to get through this, I feel like it's him.
Yeah, no, and I was lucky enough to interview him right after he came out of chemo and stuff, and so of course, Ray being Ray, in the middle of that he'd had a planned expedition across Baffin Island on foot, which was going to be like 3 or 4 weeks, I think, and so but he still did it. He did a truncated 10-day version. Like he sort of got his chemo down where he would feel lousy for 2 weeks. And then he had like 10 days where he still had this window where he felt okay. So he's like, yeah, I think I can do this. And somehow got his doctors to okay it. And so in February, coldest time of the year on Baffin Island, trekked across Baffin Island. Yeah, absolutely incredible. Yeah,
Next
no,
level.
it's yeah.
Next level human being.
You know, and I would say for most people that would be insane, but I kind of feel like with him, that's him. Like that's totally him, and that's exactly what he needed to do. You know, so but don't do this at home, kids. Yeah,
Very much so. Yes. And Adam Schultz, who has a new book coming out in October. Yeah, and I saw that you recently sat down with him. I'm very excited for this new book too, where he canoes from essentially his home to like the north.
Yeah, to the Arctic, to the ocean. Yeah, in northern Quebec. Incredible. Yeah, Adam is just another just really lovely, down to earth guy, but does these epics, mostly solo expeditions where he, you know, and this one was 34 kilometers from Lake Erie, had to portage around Niagara Falls. So, and what was cool about this one too, just talking to him, was he mostly would go back and beyond and not see another person, right? And it's him and wildlife. And so he paddled like across the Arctic 4,000 kilometers a few years ago. Yeah, amazing stuff like that. But this one, he went right through the densest populated. I mean, he went through Toronto, went through Hamilton, went through Montreal, Quebec City, you know, like, yeah. And so that was a whole different sort of take on what Canada was and what its natural spaces are, and really fascinating. And he's a brilliant writer. I mean, I encourage anyone to pick up any of his books. His history of Canada in 10 maps, I will say, is probably one of the best histories I've ever read of this country. So anyway, he's just a great writer. And Where the Falcon Flies is totally in that genre as well.
I do want to talk about your sit down with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Talking about canoeing. There was this one thing he said, how no matter where your politics swing, I think that this is really important. He was talking about politics was a lot like canoeing down a river.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. Now the quote is, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, you know, the water's going in one direction. That's the direction you have to go. You might be able to eddy out every once in a while and just take a break, but you have no choice where the rocks are. You just have the choice about how to get around those rocks. And, you know, yeah. And so it was a great, you know, as he said, he uses canoeing as a metaphor for life. And yeah, it was a fun interview to view. I mean, it was very not political. I mean, I got the interview. It's for Canadian Geographic again, but basically said, because he's an avid canoer, and I said, look, I literally just want to talk to you about canoeing. And I think honestly, it was a 30-minute conversation. I think I kind of stopped it because that's the time they gave me. And I honestly think I probably could have gone on for another 30 minutes, you know, because he was really just loving talking about that. And he's got a big history. His dad was a really avid canoer too. And that was obviously it's like a great bond between the two of them, was paddling together when they could. You know, obviously he was prime minister as well, so didn't have a lot of time, but that was their moment together, you know? So yeah, it's my favorite kind of interview to do, is because you get somebody famous who is very passionate about something, but not the thing that made them famous, right? So they're it's slightly to the right or left of whatever their life is, but they're passionate. And I feel it always sort of is very good at revealing a side of a person that you'd never get in a straight political interview, you know? Because it becomes very personal very quickly. And yeah, it was it was a real thrill to sit down with them. And in the end, it just became sort of two guys who love canoes talking, which
that's what it sounded like. Like, you recognize his voice, but it just sounded like, two guys just talking about canoeing and their love of it.
Yeah. And it shifted to that very quickly. Like, we sat down, and behind him, we had this, at the Canadian Geographic, we had this old birch bark canoe, and he sort of started looking, but even before we started talking, he started looking at it and talking about his dad and this birch bark canoe. And I was like, well, let's save that, you know, hold on to that.
Right. We also did that
as we were doing. Yeah, exactly. As we did in this very interview before we got it rolling. So yeah. So right from the get-go, he was like engaged, and I'm like, okay, this is going to go well. So yeah, no, it was lucky. That was, years in the making, though. For any podcasters out there, that's perseverance. Like, I first started contacting them I mean, I first started contacting them about an interview when I was at NPR in Washington. So I got to know the deputy comms director who became the comms director. And I would just ping them every once in a while. And, but I'd always be pitching sort of a broader interview or, there wasn't a super focus to it. And then this past spring, I said, look, let's do it on canoes. Let's just talk canoes. And they're like, oh, that sounds great. And then, but even at that, it still took 3 months to nail that down. Obviously, he's a busy guy. So, yeah.
A few things lately, too, that probably you're catching his attention.
Yeah,
but
I know, exactly.
I was going to ask you what goes into booking and researching and conducting an interview like that, and you just kind of answered it. But I do want to know, were you nervous at all? Were you like, I'm going to interview the Prime Minister about canoeing?
Yeah, no question. I was definitely nervous going in. And unlike my podcast is an audio-only podcast, but for this one, because it's the Prime Minister, they wanted to bring in a proper TV crew and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, and that always, I mean, I've done TV for a long time. Haven't done a sit-down interview on camera probably in 12 years. So this is not a small one to like get yourself back into it,
This is very inside. I love how inside baseball this is on podcasting.
Yeah. So, and I'm kind of generally against video because I feel like once a camera gets involved, people change, because you're worried about, oh, did I just scratch my nose or does my hair look okay? Or, so generally I tend to avoid it, but I mean, he's obviously so comfortable on camera. I mean, doing media is probably his strong suit, right? So that all was not an issue whatsoever.
On the Explore podcast, tell me, we just talked about Ray Zahab, Adam Schultz, the Prime Minister. Tell me about a guest that maybe people haven't heard of that you think is super impressive.
You know what? I've got one coming up, actually. Caroline Cote, who people probably have heard of her, actually. But she just did the fastest reported walk to the South Pole just last January. Yeah, on her own, on skis. And it's just an amazing, powerful, incredible person. So that's coming up. That'll be up this fall. I was really lucky. Through Canadian Geographic, I do also podcast training in Inuit communities. And last year I was up in Cambridge Bay, sort of on Victoria Island, like in the Northwest Passage area, if you can picture that. But I got to, as well as training youth there, did some interviews and interviewed an amazing old guy who was the former head of the Hunters and Trappers Association. But he had been he is one of the last Inuit who lived a nomadic life. So he's probably in his mid to late 60s right now. But until he was like 8 years old, lived a fully nomadic life. Like I was like, do you guys have a rifle? He's like, no, it was all spears and bows and arrows and bones and everything we had, we built ourselves. And, we're on the sea ice all winter, following the seal around, and just had these amazing stories about his dad and his grandfather and uncles hunting polar bear with spears, I just love that because it was such a different world. And he's one of, the last really to have experienced that. And I love that kind of thing. And he's not, anyone would know, but that rolled out wherever that was, January or February last year. So that was an amazing one as well. I'm trying to think who else. We interviewed a younger guy, a photographer, Ryan Tidman, who lives on Vancouver Island as a photographer, amazing photographer, did wound up being on the magazine, a front page photo essay on sea wolves, which are sort of a hybrid type of wolf that lives on Vancouver Island and is all adapted to living off, whatever they can forage from the sea. And it's just something he's super passionate about. So that was, fascinating. So I got this, I started the Canadian Geographic Explore podcast because they have an annual fellows dinner every year, and usually in November. And I was at one, and it was probably 2018. And I'm in that room. And so all the fellows are explorers of some kind or scientists or have something to do with nature and in far-flung places in this country. And I was like thinking, you could literally pick at random 10 people in this room and have an amazing conversation with them. Because I was sitting at a table with, 10 people I didn't know, and they were all kind of amazing. And that was literally my pitch to Canadian Geographic. Like, let's just start working through the fellows list. So most of who I talk to are CGS or Royal Canadian Geographical Society fellows, but not always. But it's just an amazing group of people. And I feel very, very blessed to sort of have landed in that organization and have that sort of guest list rolling at me sort of all the time. So
yeah, you just have a never-ending podcast guest list.
Yeah.
But I will say, though, I never struggle getting guests because people love talking about nature adventures. Because I have other friends who do different type of podcasts they really struggle booking, but I'm like, I never struggle because people just want to talk about their passion so much.
No, it's very true. And it's just something about nature. I mean, nature absolutely changes who you are as a person, and the more you're connected to it, the more grounded and I think open to the world that you are generally. And that's certainly my experience with the podcast, and it sounds like it's exactly your experience as well. I mean, yeah. So we're both lucky we're swimming in this particular lake or pool or whatever it is we're in.
Yeah. We're kindred spirits for sure. I can tell.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
What adventures do you have planned, or do you have a dream adventure or expedition that?
I would love to get back north. I would love to do more of actually my great-grandfather's trips. I'd love to do more of that. I'm doing another trip up to Nunavut to a small community in October this year. So the last one I did was November, December, which was like minus 55. And I watched the sun rise for the last time of the year and sort of thing. That it was amazing. And I was kitted out in full Canada Goose everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's like good for an hour kind of thing.
Yeah, lucky, yeah.
So this is earlier in the year, and this is a smaller community, and I'm going to be there for the end of caribou season. So I'm hoping to get out on the land a bit more too. So I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm sort of always looking forward to whatever's next. It's kind of.
Well, I'm surprised I have not ran into you yet in Gatineau Park. Maybe we can go for a ski or something.
Yeah.
But this was lovely, and I'll put all the notes for your episodes and your podcast. And I know that Adam Schultz is doing a talk in November. And
November 29th, I think, at Canadian Geographic, talking about where the falcon flies, which is his latest book. So,
yeah. I have a new the episode's coming out probably before this one does, but I definitely have to make it to that. And I've never been in that building before, which is like a 50-minute walk from my house. So it's beautiful.
Yeah. It's 50 Sussex Drive. So it's just down the street from the Prime Minister's residence, but it's right on the Rideau Falls, right overlooking the Ottawa River, and the Gatineau River is just down. So it's like just a lovely spot, and seems like a very fitting spot for a geographical society too. Because, as I say, the Ottawa River is one of the world's great exploration routes, right? For tens of thousands of years, it's been the way to get deep into this continent. And so we're super lucky to be living on such an important and historical stretch of water.
I feel like I need to have you back. I feel like we just scratched the surface. So
okay, it's a deal. Anytime. Happy to do it.
David, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really, really nice to chat with you and meet you. And we'll have to get together in person.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.